Watch The Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTAXP and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callaxp.
It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello, and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that always brings toy cleaner. My name is Christy Powell, and I'm joined tonight by someone who just loves the smell of silicone in the morning. Welcome back, Griffin.
I sure do, and I love that you gave me a movie/book reference to lead in with. You know me too well.
Right, I'm hitting on all cylinders. We're only 30 seconds in, but it's a great show so far. Let's keep it rolling, because tonight's guest is the doll master himself. Welcome, Ricky Adams.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here, and I'm looking forward to tonight's show.
Well, that is outstanding. And tonight we're putting away our tea sets and getting out the lube. So give us a call with your stories and questions at 512-991-9242 or tiny.cc/callsex, because the show is coming right now.
Well, this is definitely going to be a fun show tonight, and I'm excited to get to it. But before we get started, Ricky, I'd love to get to know you a little bit. And the best way to do that is just finding out what's got you turned on right now. So what's got you worked up?
Right now, what's turning me on is that new Dahmer show. I've been enjoying that one a lot with a girlfriend. And I know it's extremely popular because there's a bunch of memes all over the internet about it. So I know there's a lot of other people watching it. Very well written, very good directing.
Yeah, I have been very curious, so I'm interested to hear your take. Glad to know that it seems to ring true, or at least has something to offer.
It's awesome.
Kara, what about you? What's got you worked up right now?
I try to think of things that are topically relevant for the show, and I'm gonna go with genderless robots this week.
All right, hit me.
Yeah, okay, so stay with me here. I was thinking about our topic this week, and how, with dolls and, humanoid, human-shaped things that are not humans, there's this kind of idea of, well, how do you know what the gender or the sex of that thing is? And there's all these debates about, how we interact with things that are not humans, and I figured we'll talk about that later. But it just reminded me of what I love about one of my favorite sci-fi book series that we actually talked about after the show last week, which is Martha Wells' Murderbot Diaries. I have an example here in which the main character is a part synthetic robot, part human character that does not have a gender and uses the pronouns it, its. And I love every bit of it. And I hope we get into some discussions about that later this evening, but I just wanted to throw that out there, that it's super fun and exciting. And I started rereading it after our last show because I'm into it.
Well, glad to hear it. I will make sure to have links to both of those things in the show notes for this episode. One last piece of housekeeping before we jump into the interview. Kara, you had a announcement from the big office.
Yes, I do. The big office wants you all to know that we have a new mission statement. It is very similar to our old mission statement, but it's been updated and revised, and now reads that the atheist community of Austin is dedicated to promoting atheism, critical thinking, secular humanism, and the separation of religion and government. So there you have it. That's what we're here to do.
All right. Well, if that's what we're here to do, then let's do it in the sexiest, most exciting way possible, and jump right into it. Ricky, I'm super excited to pick your brain. This is a topic that literally came up in the very second episode we ever did. And I have to admit, I know so little about this world. So rather than asking you to just debunk every dumb thing we've ever seen in like bad sex comedies about sex dolls or love dolls, can you just assume that none of us actually really know much of anything about modern sex dolls? I mean, what should we know?
All right, very cool. Well, I think one of the biggest misconceptions and one of the things that we see a lot in the modern media, whether you're talking about Lars and the Real Girl, or you might be thinking um, Ex Machina too, if you're looking at the really dark side of things, you might think of sex dolls as being for people who are very socially awkward, or they're not capable of communicating in the real world with real world people, and so they retreat into this world. And I always make these jokes on the stream with these guys and gals that I tell them, oh, you living in your mom's basement and like the dark Cheeto covered keyboard environment with sticky Mountain Dew on the floors, and you got a BiPAP machine because you're 500 pounds, and you're like this really unhealthy person, like somebody like a monster that just lives in the dark, that can't talk to real people. And it's definitely the types of people who buy the dolls that make you realize that this is going more mainstream, and it may have started with the people on the other end of the extreme of really charismatic. It may have started with people who have social anxiety, and it may have started with people who are having trouble communicating. And I think that it went from those people to more your everyday kind of guy. And there's a lot of reasons that people get dolls, and some of those reasons are that they feel like modern relationships are too much trouble. I call it, maybe they've been burned, maybe they've been in a horrible divorce, or they've had trouble with an ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend that gave them a lot of trouble, and they just said, you know what, I'm going to check out of the dating scene. And what's the alternative? Well, you have dildos and fleshlights. But then if you want to take it a step up to realism, and you want to engage the fantasy side of sexuality and relationships, you would go to the sex doll, because the sex doll is like a fleshlight, but it's like also your girlfriend. And that's what I think is so cool, is that these guys, and we have less females in the community, but they are there. It's just that for every woman you have in this community, you have like 300 guys. Like, it's just it's not that there aren't any women in it, it's just that there's so much more men in it, and it throws the proportions off. But
and we see that kind of across any sort of marketed sex. Anytime you're selling sex toys, anytime you are selling pornography or anything commodified, that tends to show up for a lot of complicated reasons. But do you think it's kind of particularly pronounced in doll culture?
What is particularly pronounced?
I guess that gender differential.
Oh, I see. I would say it is. And you know what? While we're on this topic, I think the reason that you have so many more men in this than women is, for a couple of reasons. And one of the really big reasons we talk about all the time, and we're going to get into talking about small dolls a little bit later in the show, but the reason why a lot of guys, and women in particular, don't like getting a taller doll or a bigger, like more thick butt, thick hips, thick waist, thick legs, thick everything, I say, kind of doll, is because of the weight. It's the weight.
It just becomes like impractical on a certain level.
Yes, and it drives not only the price of shipping up, but it's also really difficult for people to lift this like 80 to 120 pound doll. I mean, I live on a 3rd story apartment, and like I have to carry some of these dolls up there to review them, because that's what we do in our channel. And, you know, I tell these guys, it's not if you can lift the doll. What the question is, when it really comes down to, in its raw form, is when you get horny and you want to make love to your beautiful silicone babe, are you really going to go in the next room and lift her 110-pound ass off the table, you know, and like put her in position and put her wig on and use her? Or are you going to say, oh no, I'm just going to use my hand? Because that's really where a lot of people fall. They say, you know what,
Yeah.
I'm just going to use my hand. I'll play with her later. And then you never use the doll, which you spent all this money on. They're very expensive, you know?
Okay, I have a follow-up question here. I noticed you used the term "use the doll." Is that the term that most people use when they're interacting
Using?
with this doll?
Like they're users.
No, I mean, I'm just
You know?
wondering, do people use that language, or is there? I imagine this is a topic that there's probably been some debate about among the doll community. Am I wrong?
Uh-huh. You know, there's not a particular term that they use, like sexing up the doll or anything like that. There's not a particular term that they use. They just say, oh, when I have sex with my doll or when I F my doll. But I think your question is really important. And you know why I'll tell you your question is a good one, is because a lot of people assume that guys get these dolls just for sex. And in reality, they get it not only for sex, but also partly for companionship reasons, you know? And I did a little poll one time on my YouTube channel, and I said, do you use the doll strictly for sex? Do you use the doll just for photography? Or do you use the doll for sex and photography? And I believe, if I remember right, that, you know, 60 or 70% were looking at using the doll and doing some kind of photography or for companionship, because I separated sex and companionship, and I put companionship and photography kind of together, you know, because YouTube only lets you use so many choices for surveys, you know. But I found that most people will use the doll for sex, and then after that category you have people who use the doll for sex and photography, and then on the like less than 10% part, you had people who would use the doll strictly for photography and video, no sex. And I think the reason why is just because, I don't know about you, but I would be very curious, what is it like to have sex with the doll? Because we have this stigma that having sex with a doll is like having sex with a dead body. That's what, you know, we hear some people say.
Sure.
You know, and that's one of the things, that's one of the stigmas that, you know, people who hate dolls, they'll say that just to like hurt people in the doll community. Like, oh, it's like, isn't it like having sex with a dead body? You know, but it's really not. The dolls can be posed. They don't have rigor mortis. They have joints, right? They have joints built into them. And basically what you have when you have a sex doll is you have a metal framework. So you have like little bars of like metal that go like the length of a forearm. And then you have a hinge there for the wrist in most cases. And then you have the hands, which have wires for the fingers. And then sometimes you have fingers now, which is a recent development this last year. They're articulated fingers. So they found out how to put these little joints in the fingers. So now people can have their doll holding something light, like maybe an empty soda can or something like a little plastic gun or something. Like if they're going to do like a Samus Aran a cosplay, or they're going to do like a video game cosplay, they can now pose their doll in these cute costumes and use these little props that, and the doll can hold them. And then on the other side of expensive, you have like the less expensive dolls where they have features that are downgraded skeletal features. So the more expensive dolls have a double hinge neck, so I can tip her head forward and back and left and right. And those two joints are different. The one that goes forward and back is a different joint from the one that goes left and right. So that double hinge neck, they could just say, you know what, instead of putting double hinges there in that neck area, let's just use a flexible hose. And they put a flexible hose underneath the neck, and it allows the person to bend the doll forward and back and left and right. It's an economical option, but over time it'll kind of wear out the hose. It won't be as stiff as it once was, and the head may lean to one side like that, and you don't want that. So unless you're just getting your first doll, and if you want, we could talk about what people should look for in their first doll at some point in the show, if you like.
Okay, I have so many follow-up questions based on what you just described. I love it.
Cool.
It sounds like, I mean, the technology is, getting, pretty advanced. These are very lifelike sounding in their movements and their presentation. So I have to ask, there's this concept you mentioned earlier, some people who are being rude say things like, is it like having sex with a dead body or something? But it makes me want to ask about, the concept of the uncanny valley. You've probably heard of that before. It's a concept I think it's a lot more in robotics, but it's kind of this idea that, as we make things look more human-like, we tend to think they're cute and likable up to a point, at which point they might become kind of surreal and almost like monstrous looking. Like, if you paste googly eyes on a cotton ball, oh, that's cute, it looks kind of like a face. But when you get to like corpse or zombie, that has a very different feel to it, because it's become really close to being lifelike, but it's just a little bit off, and that can be kind of off-putting. So how do you avoid this effect as they become more and more lifelike? Have you run into this issue, or how do you manage that?
What I have to say about the uncanny valley is I feel like in terms of these sex dolls, I don't think that the realism is enough to trigger that uncanny valley response. I just don't see that. And at first I had that same concern because I had heard about the uncanny valley, but getting my first doll, I thought, okay, I'm supposed to be weirded out by this, or I'm supposed to be like thinking, oh, this is like weird. Like it's just me and a doll, and she's like looking at me, but she's really not because she's a doll. And I thought that it was going to weird me out, and it really didn't. And I think one of the better questions that I had, one of my, not that that's not a good question, but I guess one of the better ways of, or one of the funny ways of thinking about this too, is like a lot of guys are like, when you see the doll, do you get like turned on? Like, do you just get an erection by yourself? Or do you like have to use your hand to kind of like get it started and then go at the doll, And I think that like this stimulation with the hand and then going to use the doll after that is what most guys do. But I think that there are some people who are outliers who feel like, oh no, I could just look at the doll and it
just
turns
the image
me
itself.
On. You know what I mean?
I mean, I'll acknowledge I spent a little bit of time on your Instagram page with a number of like posed photos, and yeah, there's a definite like erotic quality to everything that you're publishing there.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a really great person here doing our photography and video, Scary Terry. I personally do not have very good posing skills, but there's some people in this doll community who are very good. And just like a little fun thing, to talk about is when you pose the doll, one of the things that's most important when posing the doll for photography and video that many people forget is the eyes, because they will pose the doll right in a certain way, and then they have so much to convey in the emotion of the eyes. And then what happens when you look at the eyes? They're cross-eyed, or like they're going the opposite way, like chameleon, and you're like, that doesn't look very realistic. You spent all this time doing the posing, but you forgot the eyes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, that's a lot of times what we're focusing on. If it's, with another person, that could definitely, I could see how that could take you out of the mood real quick if it looked silly.
What are some of the, tips or tricks or just best practices for people who are curious about maybe making their first purchase?
I made a video maybe like 2 or 3 weeks ago called Silicone versus TPE with the sex dolls. And it kind of distilled and boiled down some of the main points of silicone versus TPE. And the reason why I talk about this as being very important, other than what kind of brand should you get and what price range should you look at, I think the most important thing that's going to define your doll experience is going to be the material that the doll is made out of, because
Mm-hmm.
most of these dolls are made out of TPE, which is less expensive, but it brings its own set of problems or things that need to be addressed. It needs to be oiled with mineral oil or baby oil every 6 to 12 weeks, I advise. And that oil will keep the doll nice and soft and supple. And it will keep her from drying out and feeling like a gift shop starfish on the ocean. Like that's
Yeah.
what I tell people, like, is she will dry out and her skin will get flaky. And, if you're not that type of person that's going to oil the doll and keep her hydrated, you need to seriously consider silicone, because silicone is less maintenance, but it's more firm. And silicone, it can withstand high temperatures, but it doesn't stretch very much. So for those of us who are very, very gifted downstairs, and we have the big horse genitalia, which I'm jealous if that's you. But those people, these men have complained to me, particularly when they get scaled down small silicone anime style dolls, when they get these dolls that are smaller and they have like a really tight vagina, it tends to be very, very painful for some of these customers, and it kind of scares them away from the doll experience.
Sure.
So I think that choosing the material of the doll properly is very, very important as a consideration.
And I'm also hearing here that using lube is important. Yes.
Always.
Yeah, the lube
a good idea,
is
yeah.
really, you're right. The lube is very important. And one of the things that I think is important in the topic of lubricants is that many lubricants are silicone based, as you may have heard. And these silicone based lubricants are not only bad for TPE dolls, but they can be bad for silicone dolls too. So you can kind of think of like oil and water, and you could think silicone and TPE are like oil and water. You should not try to mix them. And the silicone lube can dissolve the TPE flesh of the doll. And in the terms of silicone dolls, the silicone lubricant can try to mix with the silicone of the doll. So that's why I use oil and water, because you try to contaminate. I mean, if you contaminate oil with water or vice versa, it's like it's not good. But then with one, it also tries to mix with the other. So silicone will try to mix with silicone, but silicone will dissolve TPE. So either case, it's not good. And sorry, I didn't make
this is very true for anything you would insert inside of yourself in either direction. Also, just good tips to be thinking about, folks.
That's such a good point, because we talk about chemicals and the chemicals that are used to make these dolls, and I always forget the gosh darn name of these chemicals, but they're the ones that they add to cheap dildos and cheap toys. That's really, really bad for you. It could be absorbed into the mucous membrane, and it's just a really nasty thing to put in your body. So I like that you mentioned that, because, in a chemical reaction, you have what it started off as, and then you have the two chemicals coming together and forming a new chemical, and that new chemical may not be safe for your body.
Be careful when you're doing chemistry at home.
Doing chemistry with your mucous membranes home alone. Yeah, that's sufficiently euphemistic. I think we're all on the same page. Well, before we start to move on to calls and everything else, I wanted to just get a general impression of what it's like as a first-time buyer. I mean, what kind of price ranges should we be looking at? How much does cost actually matter? What are some of the features? I mean, just quick as you can, what are some of the things that should be red flags for us as we're like going through this process?
Well, first off, I think that people need to be aware that there are a ton of scammers out there in the world of peddling sex dolls. Now, you will go on eBay and you will see $2,000 dolls being advertised for $600. And if that doesn't scare you, then maybe $400 will. Because when somebody shows me a Ferrari and says it's only going to cost you $2,000 on Craigslist, like alarm bells are going off in my head. And those are the same alarm bells that people should be hearing when they go and see a really, really nice looking doll for under $1,000 that is life size, because it's very difficult to build a high quality doll for under $1,000 that is over 4'5", 4'7". And remember that the weight is a really, really important consideration here. When you're talking about price range, one of the reasons I like this one brand in particular, AF Doll, is because they make some adult size dolls that are like 5'1" to like 5'7", 5'6", and these dolls are priced right around $1,200 to $1,400. And AF Doll is a really good brand because they give people the option of getting the hinge neck or paying less and get the hose neck. Or if they don't want to pay $50 for the hinged wrist, they could get wire wrists. So they can choose between downgraded features and upgraded features, where most manufacturers will make the person have the features that they sell. Look, it just comes like this. So do you want it or not? But AF Doll kind of gives them the ability to scale down the quality of the doll so they can afford it. And one of the things that people should be looking for when they get their first doll, I think under $1,000 is good, but I think maybe under $1,500, maybe under $1,600 is a little more realistic. And I try and tell guys, please don't buy the $3,000 or $4,000 doll as your first doll. I want you to think
how much does your like true Ferrari cost? I mean, I'm sure we can get into like diamond encrusted wildness. I mean, we are talking about sex and the internet, but realistically speaking, how much could you drop if you really, really just wanted to spend?
If you're going to try and buy the most expensive doll you can, you're going to be going to Real Doll, which is based in California, sunny California. And Real Doll, they make these silicone dolls that start around $6,000 to $7,000.
Wow.
And then you can get a robotic version of those dolls that, like, the head moves around. It's like, hello, I'm Harmony. Want to have sex with me? If you want one of those dolls, and actually it's not like that bad, I'm just joking, but the Harmony sex robot is like 13, maybe even 14,000 now. I haven't checked lately, but it'll cost you over 10 grand. So it's kind of like paying for a car, and Harmony actually has some features built into her, if I remember right. Or if I'm more updated on the situation, they were building in like kind of consent features, and it's not like super hardcore. Like it's not like, get off me if you don't like go through it, but it's kind of like they're looking into adding those features, which some people are not a fan of. And I guess I don't need to tell you why. I guess people feel like, hey, like I bought this doll, like she should like me, I shouldn't have to like prove myself. If I wanted that, I would go to the bar down the street, and so some people will say, oh, that sounds a little rapey. But really it's true. If you buy a car, you would hope that the car would let you drive it.
Yeah, I don't ask a vibrator for consent before I turn it on. And, I think that's part of what makes all of this interesting, because we are talking about the fantasy of a person, but not the actuality of one. And, how dangerous is it to let ourselves indulge in these, I guess I can't even say consensual non-consent fantasies, because this is really just non-consent, but also from an object. There's definitely a lot there that we'll get into after the break, but this clearly brings up like some challenging and complicated questions.
Right. And there are going to be some people out there that say, well, these dolls train men to rape women, and these are just people who don't like sex dolls, or maybe they're not educated on the subject of sex dolls, and they think that maybe it is for that. I know that there's some people who genuinely think that, but I think in the majority are the people who just hate the dolls, and they're just thinking of any reason, any excuse to ban the doll from being bought by these guys. And I think that the dolls themselves can be very, very therapeutic for people who have social anxiety. We've had a lot of customers that say, you know, I feel very, very nervous and I have a lot of anxiety and I have trouble talking to real girls or talking to even the bros in the social situations. And these dolls just make me feel less anxious. They take away my social anxiety and they take away my loneliness and they make me feel good. So at the end of the night, when I go to watch my show, I have my doll next to me and I make us a nice bucket of popcorn and she holds the popcorn and I eat the popcorn out of the bucket and we watch the show together. And after that, you know, I clean up everything and maybe I have sex with the doll and then I go to cuddle her and hold her when I fall asleep. And that makes me feel like there's a presence of another human there. And it makes me feel comfortable and it makes me feel accepted, you know? And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, no, that's certainly fair to say. I know that this brings up a lot of complex questions. Before I launch into it, Kara, did you have one?
Yeah, I was just going to say it's not really a question, but well, I did have a question too. But what you just described sounds to me, I think, perhaps a lot more relatable to people now after a couple of years of being in isolation, perhaps at home.
Sure.
You can come to appreciate, you know, the need for that contact, whether it's with a living, breathing human being or something that simulates that. But I did actually have a question for you, Christy.
Yeah.
Does your vibrator have a name?
Honestly, I am not organized enough and responsible enough to have ever established that point. I mean, we got too many characters in the field. I can't keep up with everybody.
I love it. I do. When we come back around to the deeper topics, I do want to talk more about how these dolls get named and the whole thing that goes into that. I am fascinated. I am coming at you with the social science.
That's super cool.
Yeah, we've been kind of hinting around the drama that these things can create and the people that are so angry about these products even existing. Like I said earlier, one of the very first calls we ever took on this show gave me the opportunity to have like my young, anxious, like intern face next to the words robot doll sex brothel, which was like the proudest moment of my early career. But that call was about Aurora Doll, a company up in Toronto opening up, I suppose you might call it a brothel. Maybe a more realistic thought is to think of it as renting a doll by the hour. There's been a lot of drama since that initially opened and then closed. I mean, can you tell us about the state of that sex dolls by the hour brothel concept? Is that something that people watching tonight may be able to do in order to play test or sample?
Okay, first off, there is a person who they're in the space on YouTube, and I'm not going to mention who they are because I don't want to, you know, defame anybody or whatever, but they claim to have a brothel in Canada, and I think it's a load of malarkey. I don't think that that's really a real thing.
Yeah.
Now, about the brothel that you're talking about, which is a different one, I believe they did try to open one, or they were successful in opening one there. And in Houston, they tried to open one here near San Antonio. I don't know if you heard about that one.
I was reading about it, but everything on this seems to be incredibly vague. I think you get the sense that if these businesses even exist, they're operating on a very like word to mouth basis in order to avoid media scrutiny and, you know, upset legislatures who don't currently have anything on the books, but may want to consider it. I mean, is that sort of the sense that you get?
Well, what I want to say is this. I'm not going to make this political, okay? So don't freak out, because I know we're not supposed to talk about politics, and maybe we can't talk about religion. I don't know, but I'm going to stay off of both here. But what I want to say, and carefully to people, because I know there's going to be people who probably get offended, okay? You have people who hate sex dolls on the left and the right. So on the left, you may have like extreme, like radical feminists, and on the right, you may have like grandpa, that's like 90 years old, and he's like, oh, this is the downfall of society. And you have people on both sides who hate these dolls. And that's a really dangerous part about the legislature stuff that you're talking about, is that there's people on both sides who hate this. And if they both agree that it's bad for society, then yes, the dolls can become illegal. And so what I like to say about this is that, sorry, I got a little bit distracted by the chat over here. So anyway, I got a little bit distracted, sorry. But what I want to say about that is that I use the analogy of the taking away the childlike sex dolls to taking away the 100-round magazines from people who have AR-15s or AK-47s, right? I feel like if you take away the very large capacity magazines, a lot of people will be like, I agree. I think that that's cool. And then they're going to come for the 50 round, and then they're going to come for the 20 round, and then they're going to take away all the magazines, and then we're going to be hunting deer with muskets. And whether you agree with having guns or not is not what I'm trying to say.
Sure, what I'm trying to slippery slope notion.
Right. What I'm trying to say is that the equivalent of the 100-round magazine to the AR or whatever, AK-47, right? Because I don't know a lot of these guns, but the equivalent is childlike dolls in terms of sex dolls. Most people can agree, a 100-round magazine isn't necessary to hunt deer, right? But there's a lot of people who will agree that childlike sex dolls are bad for society. And I personally feel the opposite. But because most people will agree that the childlike sex dolls are not good for society, that means that they will become illegal. But the really, really dangerous part of banning childlike sex dolls is that when people make these laws, they don't actually define what a childlike sex doll is. And so, you may ask Kara, what do you think is an acceptable height for a doll? And Kara may say 5'1". But then if we ask Christy Powell might say, you know what, I think it's 5'6", and I might say it's 4'7", because I sell the dolls and I want to be able to sell dolls that are, 4'7" or above, not start them off at 5'7" to where they're already weighing 90 pounds. And when you look at
impossible to legislate, really. There's no law that you can write that accurately describes the word childlike. Yeah.
Right. And so they don't actually describe what a childlike sex doll is. And so that's the dangerous part of it. And thus we're forced to self-regulate, and we have people who do actively go around trying to get vendors like me in trouble. And so I've thought to myself, because so many people have asked me, please stop selling these dolls, or maybe they're like, oh, this is a horrible thing that you're selling. And I thought, well, should I unlist these dolls like everybody else? But the true feeling that I have in my heart is that I would be harming children by taking away people's ability to buy these dolls, because I believe that the type of people who would harm a child are already animals, and they don't need a test dummy to help turn them in to an animal. They're already somebody who, like the tigers in India, that actually are man-eaters, that they have to have the taste of human flesh. This is probably not a good example, because with that, they are actually trained to like that taste of human. But here, I believe that these people are already disturbed from birth, or maybe through the experience. They're already a monster from those experiences that they went through, I don't feel that they need help to train them to become a monster, and then they become somebody who would harm a child. Because a lot of people, I feel like this is the same, rock and roll causes people to worship the devil. I don't think that people who worship the devil need rock and roll to help them worship the devil.
Pull it off. Sure.
And you know what I mean? And I don't think people who would go into a school with a gun and take several people's lives, I don't think that they need video games to help them do that. And the people who would harm a child, I don't think that they need a childlike sex doll to push them in their mind to go on Facebook and prey on real children, And I've actually talked to law enforcement about this before, and I told them, this is kind of crazy because, oh gosh darn it, I lost my train of thought. But what I'm trying to say is that these people are already going to do this. They're already going to harm children. And I feel like having the doll gives them that last choice to say, you know what, do I want to actually go out and do this? Because mostly these people who would go out and do this, they know that what they're doing is wrong, but they just can't help themselves. And so I feel like the doll is a way for them to use this doll in their own home, and something that doesn't actually harm children. And sorry, I thought about the law enforcement thing, what I was going to say a while ago. And what I was going to say is that the difference between having a childlike sex doll, if you want to actually think about something that obviously looks like a 5-year-old or a toddler or something, the difference between this and child pornography is that in the case of child pornography, there is a real human victim. Sure. A real child will go through a traumatic experience and be harmed as a result of the distribution of the pornography. And some people who have the pornography will say, oh no, it's not a good, it's not harming anybody for me to watch this, because it's not like, having the 187th copy of this is going to result in another child being harmed. But of course we have to think about, well, an actual victim had to be created for this material to exist. So in reality, you are contributing to the problem, where with the doll, it's just TPE or silicone molded over metal, and it's made to simulate something. And so there actually is no real victim.
Yeah, I think that that's really important to point out. And, whether or not we can put this conversation next to a conversation about violent movies and violent video games and how comparable those things really are, I mean, there's definitely some messiness here, and a line that should probably be drawn somewhere. But whether that should be done by a legislature, whether that should be done by a culture or society or on an individual level, there's a lot of stickiness to that question. But I don't know that we're quite ready to get into all of it. Let's take a moment now, if we can, and see what's been going on around the rest of the ACA.
Wait, you're a what? What do you like to do? You like cupcake batter on your nipples? That's so weird. It's just like, yeah, maybe it's weird for me and you, but like for them, that's what floats their boat.
Maybe Elon Musk is actually an insectoid in disguise. Oh, and the reason why he wants us to get to Mars is he wants to go home, dude.
Healthcare should be something that's between the patient and the doctor. Until Jesus is coming into your examination room and healing you of whatever you have, he really has no place making decisions about anybody's health.
That's also an example, though, of somebody who's obviously coming into this show hot, right? They're heated. And so, like, there's no chance in hell that they're interested in what we really have.
Shirt off, oiled up.
Yeah.
They're coming into the show hot.
Talked to too many... Jesus Christ.
I have zero interest in people who have defined gods as abstractions. You may believe in a God. It's like the person earlier who said that their God was gratitude and stuff. Okay, cool story, bro. Fire up a bong.
Okay, so we have some calls and some people with questions for you, Ricky. So if you're game, I will start us off with one that I will read to you due to some audio issues on their end. Okay.
Awesome.
Great. So this one is from Phoenix in Texas, and he is wondering, it's a multi-part question. So he's wondering, what is the most common reaction you get to the industry itself? And what is the most extreme reaction you get? And what would you like to say to those people about this?
I think that they're, for the most part, the type of questions that I get by far are, what kind of people buy these dolls? Like, are they like these really like weird guys that like, you know, they can't talk like normally for like more than 2 sentences without you like thinking there's some kind of weird freak, you know? Like, are they like sex freaks? Are they people who, like I said, live in their mom's basement in this dark dungeon? And like, you know, and I just like to tell them, look, any and every type of person will be the kind of person to buy a doll. I mean, you have couples and you have men who are single who've been divorced. You have guys who are like 19 or 20 and they're just like, they're not out in the dating scene, I guess, you know, because right now we're starting to see this divide, especially I think Kara had mentioned earlier about this particular pandemic thing we had. And I won't say anything more than that P word because I don't want YouTube to flag us or anything. But what I want to say is that this has sort of divided men and women, and it's kind of like made us very isolated, and it's made our social problems like go higher. And it's actually oddly enough, you know, during this thing that we went through in 2020, we've seen a lot of men who have like gone into this like sex doll thing. And I'm sure that women have their vibrators and dildos, but men, a lot of us have gotten into the sex doll thing. And I saw sales rise in 2020 to 2021, you know, and we've kind of steadily grown. This year we've been kind of like plateaued, but I saw, you know,
a little bit of that retraction that everybody's been seeing after the big sell-off and commodification of sex. Like OnlyFans and a number of different sex toy stores have all seen that like skyrocket and then sort of plateau.
Right. And that's what we saw, is that a lot of people who are isolated and they were like, oh, I'm going to get Uber Eats because I'm too scared to go out and order from a real restaurant because somebody might actually have this horrible bug and I don't want to get that. And so it caused a lot of isolation. And even you saw on dating profiles, you would have like a lot of people were like, I'm not going to meet. We're only going to do virtual, you know, and there's a lot of guys who were like, oh, how is that going to get me laid? You know, like, and so guys were looking for alternatives. And so we, like I said, we started with sex dolls. I believe we started off with the people which were the kind of people that a lot of others imagine as the typical customer, which are guys who are like really weird, or maybe they're super obese or something, which, no judging, I know that the world is a really, really rough place. And I think that it started with those guys, and then it kind of like branched out to become more socially acceptable. And I would like to say, let's use online dating as a good example of that. At first, it was like, oh, you were some kind of weirdo or loser to use it. And then everybody and their mom had Tinder and Bumble and these Plenty of Fish and stuff, right? So it started off with those type of people maybe, but now it's become so mainstream. And I like to tell people, you know, the ones who ask what kind of person buys a doll, and I'm like, think about something like your brother or your neighbor's wife, or just any random person on the street could be a buyer of these dolls, because it's become, like you said earlier, Christy, that we see all these shows about dolls. I forget which one was that one that came out recently with that one female actress, and she finds her boyfriend's doll in the closet or something. That I forget what the name of that one. Oh, this thing is called Dummy. And we start to see these popular shows, especially Lars and the Real Girl is very highly referenced by guys in the doll community. And the Lars and the Real Girl movie is basically about a guy who is like, he's got like some kind of mental problem, and he uses the doll to kind of cope with his mental problem. And then at the end, he doesn't need the doll anymore, and now he's normal again, right? And in reality, it's not like that. People who have dolls don't necessarily have mental problems, but there are some people who do have mental problems, or maybe they have social anxiety. And that goes back to the therapeutic part of this, that some people, they get the doll and the doll makes them feel so good in terms of sex or companionship, but I think mostly in terms of comfort and companionship, that they get like 10, 15, 20, 30. And there's even some people on YouTube who have 200 to 300 dolls that they just like can't stop. You know, and think about the price of these: 1,000 to 3,000, 1,000 to 3,000 times 200 to 300 dolls. I mean, you're talking about some serious cash.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of weird pieces to it, and I would hope that we can be at least curious. You know, we see all kinds of like girlfriend experience pornography, and I think that, yeah, there are certainly people who are spending money that they don't have in problematic ways and avoiding facing their lives, and are not having like the best experience because they, you know, go down that rabbit hole. But I also don't think that it's fair to then demonize that type of pornography. You could say the same thing about people who spend too much money on golf or on video games and these different kinds of things. But when it starts to be about sex, we all get very uncomfortable.
Right. And I would say, in terms of that question about the really extreme reactions that we get, I would say that the most extreme reactions don't come from people asking about the dolls. It's actually pretty horrible. It's from the people who are relatives of the people who buy the doll. When they find out about the doll, that's when all hell breaks loose sometimes.
Just our desire to control others there.
Right. And you have to understand that when I answer my phone, there's no way for me to tell if the person on the other side of the phone is somebody who's found their husband's doll or somebody who's found their son's doll, because we know that now this generation of millennials, half of us are something crazy close to that. Half of us like live with our mom and dad. So like this stigma of living with your parents, I feel like it kind of needs to stop. I think that it helps men when they, and probably I believe it helps women too. So I shouldn't say it just helps men, but I say men because they're the majority of my audience. But I think it helps people when they move out of their parents to like push them to like want more, because they start at the bottom and usually some dark, expensive apartment, or maybe like a dirty apartment or something, and they need roommates, and it pushes them to be better. But this stigma of living with the parents, I feel like, you know, I make a few jokes about it sometimes, but, you know, people should know I'm not being actually serious, because I moved back into home too, for a little period of time when I was like around 26 or 27. And a lot of women will not date you if you're with your parents still like in your late 20s.
Yeah, I mean, what bullshit rules and lines we draw for each other.
Right. And so, and like, it's perfectly normal to live with your parents in other countries, but here it's like, oh my God, you're such a weird loser or whatever. But what I mean to say, though, is that if 50% of millennials are living with their parents or whatever, and this millennial buys a doll, there stands a chance that his parents could run into it. And we've had some instances where that has happened, and it's really uncomfortable for me. I had one where the sister called me and she's like, oh no, actually I called her because I could not get a hold of her brother, and the brother was in the hospital. She goes, oh, he's in the hospital or whatever. What is this about? Oh, well, My customer, who is your brother, because I asked for him by name. Let's just say John Smith. You know, I am his. How should I say? I sold him something or whatever, right? Oh, what did you sell him? Well, ma'am, I'm not at liberty to tell you because it's not you. You're not John Smith, so I can't talk with you about this. You know what I mean? Oh, well, if you don't tell me what this is about, then I'm gonna, back charge a credit card or blah blah blah. And she's like, hey, wait, is this about that thing? Oh my God, I can't believe it. And I'm like, oh my God, please shoot me in the head. And it's like, I can't control this type of stuff. You have to tell people, on the statement, it'll say TDC LLC and then my phone number on the credit card statement. And that is like the most I can go to where it's the best of both worlds. People could see on the statement, hey, there's a number I can call to find out, what this charge was about, because I don't remember spending $2,000. But we don't actually spell out the doll channel on the credit card statement, and we don't write the doll channel on the label when the doll gets delivered, because we don't want your parents to find out. We don't want the neighbors or your dog to find out, that you're a sexual deviant. I mean, a sex doll buyer. I'm just playing. But
discreet packaging is definitely an important part of the industry. I no doubt.
And I imagine it's a little bit harder to keep this size of product concealed from the people you live with than, some of the other sex toys or items that people might buy. Where do people usually keep these when they're not in use?
That's an excellent question because, if you have the doll just in a box, anybody can open that box and see what's inside, especially since I'm willing to bet that you don't tape up that box between uses because it's just inconvenient. But some people buy these things called flight cases, and the flight case is a plywood box. It's spray painted this really pretty shiny black color, and then it's got nice aluminum trim, and you can lock it. You could put padlocks on it, and of course your wife could get bolt cutters and cut it over, but that she's probably not going to do that. What she's most likely going to do is going to be like, honey, what's in that box? And then you're going to be like, a guitar. Why? Oh, because I'd never seen an 80-pound guitar, and it's like, oh yeah, and then you're like,
human-sized gun safe. This is strange.
You know what I mean? And so people keep them in the flight case, but if your spouse or mom or dad or friend or roommate finds this, then yeah, you're gonna have to answer some questions if they're nosy about it. So I'm guessing one of the things that people could do if they want is to say it's a Foot Locker and then keep it on the floor and then just put like a tablecloth over it, like it's a makeshift coffee table for somebody who's like maybe in college or somebody who's just like just chills at home with the bros, that maybe they're not married. But yeah, if you're married, you're gonna have to get creative. And I've seen some men who have bought a doll, their wife doesn't know anything about it. Their wife would kill them if the wife found out that they bought this doll, and they have to resort to keeping the doll in a storage unit. And then when they're in the storage unit with the doll, they take her to a hotel, use her, or do whatever they do with the doll in the hotel room. God only can, we can only imagine. And then they take the doll back to the storage, and then they go back to home. And, I like to tell people, well, maybe like be married to somebody that would be cool with your sex stuff before you get married to them. Or accept those consequences. It's going to be very inconvenient for you if you end up getting a doll later on and your spouse doesn't approve,
Yeah, I guess, ideally speaking, we would be cultivating relationships that are based on honesty and,
not spending thousands of dollars on items without telling our partners.
Right.
Yes. I mean, if that's couch cushion money for you, then like, all right, pop off. But I know if I spend $2,000 on a toy of any stripe, that, it's going to come up.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see why people would see that charge on the credit card bill and want to know where the money went. Hopefully it's something that maybe you and your partner can enjoy together and both be excited about. I don't know.
Many couples have, and that's a good point. I mean, I've had several couples who have bought a doll and had one particular horror story where the couple had bought the doll and bonded to her, oh, we love her, Kara, or not Kara, I'll use another name. Like Stephanie,
Okay.
she's such a good doll, she's like, oh my gosh, she's like part of our threesome relationship, we're this polyamorous relationship with Stephanie, and she's such a wonderful, amazing doll. And then the husband in the relationship, he invites his friend over and they leave the doll unattended with the friend. And guess what happens? The friend uses the doll and abuses the doll and leaves her in the corner, just like thrown on the floor. And then the friend leaves. And then the husband and wife come home to see this horrible act that's been committed to their doll. Oh, I thought he was a friend. I thought, no, that's one thing you should do is if you're going to have people going in your home, definitely secure the doll or take her somewhere, storage or something, maybe to a friend or a family member that you trust, because that has happened before. And that's the only instance I've heard of that happening. But again, I think it goes to the way of the curiosity, right? I think a lot of us are curious. What would it be like to have sex with the sex doll? And some people, again, they cannot control themselves.
Well, and that's an interesting story too, because it sounded also like, there's some kind of, I don't want to say seepage, because that's probably not a good term to use on this channel and under any circumstances, but maybe some crossing it where it's like moist.
I just wanted to take this as a quick moment to encourage everybody to use a proper toy cleaner designed for that purpose. Just throwing that out there, regardless of what we're talking about, get yourself a good adult toy cleaner. Keep going, Kara.
Also that. But, I was going to say, it sounded like maybe this couple was not only concerned about, the cleanliness or hygiene or anything like that, but it sounded like there was, in the story, correct me if I'm wrong, a little bit of concern for, you said, I think something horrible happened to her. The doll, like we're really, personalizing these dolls in some cases, it sounds like. Is that
right?
It's a fantasy relationship romance component here, yeah?
Yeah.
Exactly, Christy. I think that's the most important thing to realize is I don't think that they were so much distraught by the fact that, oh, this doll costs money. And, I think they were thinking like, this is my partner in a relationship that was assaulted. And that's really traumatic to people who form that bond with the dolls. Just the way it would be if it happened to, your real life flesh and blood boyfriend or girlfriend, you would be very traumatized. And of course they know, okay, the doll's not actually a real human person, but when using these dolls, imagination really comes into play in big ways. And so I have this sort of personal belief that there are some people who are much more hardwired to have the sex doll life as part of their personality than others. And you would probably look at me and say like, oh yeah, this guy, like he's probably got like 5 to 10 dolls and he's probably like super heavy into the doll life and stuff. And you know what? Unfortunately, as much as I wish that I was one of those people that was really heavily able to engage their imaginary part of their self and like channel that spirit energy to like form a bond with dolls and stuff, I'm unfortunately not one of the people that was born that way. And so I have to put in more effort to make a relationship with the doll work, where some of these guys just naturally do it. And I'm like really jealous of them, because real life relationships do take time. They do take money. They do stress us and they do age us. They do provide some good benefits, but I wish that I was one of those people that was like, you know what? I could quit sugar and I can switch to aspartame, but no, I'm so addicted to sugar that I can't go to the alternative very easily. I have to try very hard. Like those people who like stevia, to me, it's like, oh, I just don't like the way it tastes at all. And there's some people who are like, it tastes just like sugar. And I'm like, no, it doesn't.
Oh, that's great. Well, I do want to go on to some other calls, but is there anything else that you want to say? I know part of this question was, is there anything that you'd like to say to, the critics or the people with extreme reactions? Was there anything else you wanted to mention about that before we go on?
I think it goes to like what Christy had said about not being accepting of other people's lifestyles. And by far, I have to tell you that I don't personally meet many people at all. I struggle to think of one who just thought, sex dolls are for monsters or for weird people or for losers. Like, I just don't talk to those people in real life. And I've talked to a lot of people who, like in the bowling alley where I go bowling every week, I talk to people, they know what I do, they know what I sell. And I've even talked to some of them about selling the childlike dolls, so to say. And these people agree with me to my face anyway. I don't know if they say a different story behind my back, but in person, these people will say, you know what? It is good that you sell them as an alternative to harming real children. I wouldn't want predators, trying to hunt down my child on Facebook or Snapchat or TikTok, which is very wildly popular with young kids nowadays. But you know what? There's predators everywhere. So if you sell a viable alternative that doesn't result in any real children being harmed, I'm all for it. And I've never really had people argue with me in real life saying like what you do is wrong. The people who argue with me and say what you do is wrong, or they are actively trying to shut us down, or other companies who sell similar products, I feel like these are people who are like hiding in the shadows behind a keyboard, or maybe they're working in a government and they just are so hardwired to think that this is a bad thing. And what I have to say before I forget to bring this point up, we are very much lacking in research as to whether these dolls are a good or bad things in terms of like harming children, right? I might have an opinion and you might have an opinion that is otherwise, but we don't have very many studies and we don't have very much scientific proven information that goes to show if these dolls are good or bad for the existence of children and their mental health. And what really bothers me about just coming out with a law and saying, oh my gosh, oh no, that definitely shouldn't be allowed to be legal, that's just horrible, look at it looks just like a child. Right, I understand the response, the initial response to seeing that and thinking about, well, when you see a doll, you think about a real human child if it looks like a child, and you associate a predator harming a real child, and you think, oh no, this is automatically bad. But what I think people need to do is take a step back and look at it from a different angle, because our initial response to something, right? Like when we talk about the uncanny valley and we talk about how the dolls look very real, our first thing is thinking about real human children. But if you look at the doll more like a toaster or a cabinet or a hammer, it doesn't look anything like a child. And when you think of it like in that objective way, when you think about it from the terms of, hey, this doll is actually not a person, it is an object like a hammer or a drawer or a refrigerator, then you can kind of think a little more logically and don't think so emotionally, and think, you know what, this can be used as a way to prevent harm to real human children. And I think that there are some people who are just not going to be convinced by my argument. They're just dead set thinking what they think, but I'm dead set on what I believe. And I believe personally that I would be a coward to take these off the market just to appease what most people think is right, because what I believe is right is protecting children through providing this alternative, which is harmless in my opinion.
Well, and to your point, yeah, having more studies and more empirical evidence on which to base these decisions would be a lot better than just everyone basing it on whatever their gut reaction was. So absolutely, more research is not a bad thing.
We should be so lucky to have that data. The few studies that exist are really, really weak. And yeah, there are some studies that show that when you expand access to something like pornography, for instance, that there may be something of a drop in sexual violence in that space, but they're really, really weak. And I'd be careful about wanting to really extrapolate to this. But yeah, it feels somewhat intuitive to me that if we are giving people a safe outlet that is not harming anybody, yes, people who are attracted to minors may use that as a diversion. Whether that's true or not, there are absolutely people who are perhaps working out their own child like sexuality, who are perhaps working out their own sexual trauma from their childhood. That's not to say that these things are like necessarily therapeutic, but I absolutely believe that if a person has a opportunity to form that attachment, to have an emotional reaction in response to it, that there's a very real possibility to use that as a tool for healing.
Right. And the real problem here is that this thing is not a black and white issue. Now, we talked about earlier how some people argue that there are people who they need help to train themselves on a childlike doll before they actually go to harm a real child. Do I believe that there are people out there who do need a device to train them to harm a real child? Yes. But let's say that there's only one of those people for every 10 people who would harm a child, but the doll serves as an alternative. Well, then we're doing more good than bad by having them out on the market. And so I want to make that clear. You know, you can't just put people in these individual buckets where this is black, this is white, this is red, this is blue. You know, there are some mixtures of colors there, and there are parts of the spectrum between the left and right, or between black and right, black and white, black and white. Oh my gosh. But what I want to say is that people think like one way or the other. They're very binary and they don't think, well, what's in between, you know? And I think the reason why it really hurts, the reason why this kind of thinking is so damaging is because people, I guess they think, okay, there has to be a way to save every child, right? It's a disturbing thought, right? But there has to be a way to save every child, and there has to be a way to pull every ounce of marijuana off the street. There has to be a way that we can get all the guns off the street. And the reality is that that's not going to happen. There, you know, some children are going to be harmed, and that's a very, very ugly reality that the human mind doesn't want to face. Right? Nobody wants to hear about starving children or children being abused. But it's a very unfortunate reality and a sad one that there are going to be some children who are harmed. And no matter what you do, whether you ban these dolls or not, it's going to happen. So our goal is to try and minimize that from happening as much as
minimum
possible.
Just be a part of the good. Sure.
Right. And I want to say that, you know, minor attracted persons or people who are attracted to children who are underage, like these are not necessarily bad people the way that you think that they are, right? Some of them are, but you know, some of them actually would harm real children. But a lot of these people, that's just what they like, you know? If you like men, or if you like women, or if you are lesbian or gay or trans or whatever, you like what you like. If you're a vegetable eater, you like vegetables, you don't like meat. So why am I going to force you to eat meat if you're a vegetarian? If you're a meat eater and you're on the carnivore diet, why am I going to force you to eat vegetables? That's not what you like. So,
I mean, what pedophilia is, where it comes from in the brain, and whether it's a orientation or a symptom of trauma, I think we can at least acknowledge that pedophilia itself is not a problem. Like the attraction to minors is not a problem. Pedestry is a problem. Assaulting children is a problem. The question is, do these toys, dolls, tools, you know, does it help make that problem better or worse? And I think there's a compelling argument that it helps make that problem less of a problem. But yeah, I'm with you. I would sure love to see some damn research on the subject. And it's reasonable and not shocking, but also deeply upsetting how hard it is to do that research. And it doesn't surprise me that very little has been done, but I'd like to see some effort there.
Right. Sorry, Carol, were you going to say something?
Oh no, Christy covered it.
Okay.
I think he
That's a
covered
part
all of my
yeah.
points. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Good.
We do have another caller on the line if you want to go on to another topic.
Yes, please.
Pick that up.
All right, let's see. We have return caller Grok, continuing a call from last week, wants to talk about being trans. So let me go ahead and pick that one up. Grok, how are you doing? What do you want to talk about?
I would like to clarify some things that were talked about last week and continue with my point.
Sure. Yeah, we've got just about 10 minutes, and I want to make sure to kind of recap everything for anybody who wasn't watching last week, but I'll let you go ahead and jump in with the question if we can. Yeah?
Okay, yeah, and there was a little bit of a communication error since there's a delay, and so if I run on, just say excuse me, and I'll wrap up the sentence. But there was a misunderstanding as we were ending the conversation. I believe Kara and Christy both identified themselves as gray squares, and I just wanted to clarify that.
Sure.
In that analogy,
keep in mind, not everybody listening has heard the analogy. So just, gently, quickly as you can, if you can walk us through what you were maybe hoping or intending to say.
Okay. Well, the analogy given was a machine that makes black or white squares, and then somehow a gray square is produced. So in that analogy, I was speaking about biological sex, and I don't know you or Kara or Christy if you are intersex, but that's what the gray square in that analogy is intersex. It was strictly biological, chromosomal kind of a.
I think we got that, but I think a problem with the analogy is that biological sex is not a thing. Right? Like just saying XX or XY chromosomes does not actually describe accurately the majority of people. So it's problematic in that regard. And I still am not really sure what this machine is or where it's coming from. Like you say, you have a machine that makes black squares and white squares, and then you tell me it made a gray square. So it sounds like you got a machine that makes black squares, white squares, and gray squares. Just help me understand maybe what you were trying to explain, even if we put the metaphor aside.
Okay. Let's address the statement that you made about there not being such thing as a biological sex.
We've covered that on the show a whole bunch. Do you have a question about it?
I know that there is variation amongst people in general. So I wouldn't go as far as to say that biological sex does not exist based on the fact that there is variation.
I've talked to biologists about it on this show, though, and they say that it doesn't exist. And we've documented that really well. So I don't mean to cut you off, Grok, and I don't mean to be at all persnickety here, but this is really, really important. This is not a, both sides have good points kind of notion. I'm not specifically a geneticist or a particular expert on this subject, but I'm telling you that we've talked to experts on this subject. I've got links that I can show you in the show notes for this episode. And I just want to be really clear that their notion of biological sex is really, really blurry and inaccurate. You can base your concepts of biological sex, if you want to, on gamete size. You can base it on hormones. You can base it on chromosomes. You can base it on facial features if you really want to. But all of those things are incredibly, incredibly squishy. Maybe the best way to describe this idea is something Boris Valkai said when we talked about it with him, when he pointed out that, you and I both know what a, quote, fish is. We have a concept of what a fish is. But if you go and ask a biologist, hey, what's a fish? or start to like read the definition of fish in a biological dictionary, you're going to see something that is full of exceptions and is really weird and detailed and complicated and messy. And it sure as shit is not as simple as like yes fish or not a fish. There's tons of debate and questions among experts about, quote, where we should draw the line. But the answer is always going to be somewhere, right? It's just not it's a very fuzzy concept, and that applies here too. The notion that biological sex is binary is just not grounded in science or reality.
Yeah, go ahead.
So men and women aren't fish. Males and females are not fish. And sex is, biologically, we would say that a species that produces sexually has one side and another side. And those two sides come together to sexually reproduce. So that's what I mean by biological sex, that there is
biology experts don't say that, Grok.
And a female gamete, and they come together.
So here's the thing about that. I think sometimes it can be troublesome for people when they hear something like, well, biological sex doesn't exist. Well, what do we mean by that? It doesn't mean that there's no such thing as a person that is identified as a man or as a woman or whatever. But what it means is that we've kind of taken this concept of biological sex, and that's something that we thought of, right? We use that to describe what we see in the world, but it's a little bit of a mental shortcut because the world is pretty complex. There are a lot of things that exist in nature, and we tend to like to categorize things, right? And put things into boxes. And we have these two really convenient boxes that a lot of people like to use for biological sex that are male and female. And those can be really useful. For example, when you're explaining to a child, where do babies come from, or something like that, we might refer to these boxes that we've come up with. But the problem with any kind of mental shortcut like that and category that we create to try and squish the world into is that it doesn't always work 100% of the time. It may be helpful to describe some things, but it isn't perfect. It isn't an exact match to what exists in nature. And so there are always going to be some exceptions in some ways that model doesn't exactly describe reality. And that doesn't mean that it's not useful sometimes, but the problem can happen when we come upon these exceptions, and rather than recognizing that the model doesn't perfectly describe reality, but instead we try to say, oh, well, that piece of reality must not exist then because it doesn't fit my imperfect model. But that's thinking about it in sort of the backwards kind of way. Does that make sense at all?
Well, that just goes to the point that there are variations among people. Just because, somebody's 6 foot and somebody's 5 foot, that they're somehow intrinsically different other than literally just their physical height. So I'm not talking about individual variations amongst people, because some people have big noses, some people have brown eyes, some people have blue eyes. That's not relevant. And those exceptions you're talking about don't apply, I would say, to humans. And on the planet, I don't think there's any sexually trimorphic species, such as there is a male, a female, and some other sex that would, interact in some way to reproduce. So biologically, there is a male and a female, and those male and female cells come together. And, we've identified males and females in all sorts of species, just like Homo sapiens can be identified as apes. We look at the traits of a person, and we can determine, what those traits mean. So a male would be, XY chromosome, and they would have penis and testicles and produce sperm. So
what about all of the males that
and
don't have XY chromosomes and that don't produce sperm or have testes? What do you do with those people?
I believe you're referring
How do you fit them into your model?
That's an intersex person.
Yeah, I'm wondering what is it about that you said doesn't apply? What do you mean by that?
I mean that we have classifications, right? So Pluto was once classified as a planet.
Who's we though, Grok? I'm trying to hold you to this a little bit, because
humans in
when you say
general.
we, you're not
Humans.
speaking on behalf of the scientific community as I understand it, and as relative experts on the subject have documented it. So when you say we,
Okay.
would it be okay for you to say, I don't accept people as being anything other than male and female?
I'm saying in order to function in society, we have to come to agreements about what words mean. And back to my point of Pluto used to be identified as planet, and then we discovered a bunch of Pluto-like objects in the outer solar system. So we changed the designation for what Pluto is. So it's no longer classified as a planet; it's classified as an exoplanet. So if we look at a intersex person, we classify them as an intersex person. There's no need to say that male is some nebulous idea that, you know, every human has to be able to fit into. No, we just changed the classifications, and now we have males, females, and intersex.
But not all intersex people are going to meet any specific criteria, and neither are male people or female people. There's no single line that you can draw that says, if you have this component, then you are a woman. There are plenty of women who don't meet any criteria you might select, and that's okay. And I guess what I really hoped you would realize, Grok, after having had a week to sit on this, is that the information that we understand as a society, as a scientific community, doesn't line up with the model that you've been taught. And I'm hearing you say over and over and over again, it should be this way, it needs to be this way, it makes sense to me this way, but I'm not hearing you really quote any meaningful studies. I'm not hearing you really talk about these scientific considerations that we have tried really hard to explain and express on this show. And I'll tell you what, I would love to have you maybe take a look at some of the episodes that we've done where people other than Kara and I have answered this question in more detailed ways. When we've talked to biologists and researchers and chemists and a number of different types of people, if I can put some of that in front of you and you find something disagreeable, something that you can track down in the Merck manual as being inaccurate, I would love to hear about that from you. I don't want to have a single piece of misinformation on this show to the best of our abilities, but I'm telling you just as simply and as plainly as I can, I'm not an expert, but I've learned from some brilliant people and I've read some really good books and they disagree with you. So I need you to take a look at that information before you just tell me this is the way things are or the way things should be. Is that all fair?
Well, if we can just address specifically what you've claimed. Your claim is that male is a spectrum. And what I'm saying to that is that there are variations amongst people. A variation in a person, genetically, physically, psychologically, that variation does not change a classification. Some cars have 4 wheels. Some cars have 6 wheels. We do not have a different classification for cars based on how many wheels it has. It's just a car or a vehicle or, you know, however you want to put it.
What's the classification for maleness? Let's just cut to that there. If you can tell me all males are X, then we'll have a category that we can reliably use. But I'm telling you, you're not going to be able to find an X that actually works. What is the line that you would like to draw?
What I've already said, that males have, or well, I should say male Homo sapiens have XY chromosomes. They have a penis, they have testicles, and they produce male gametes. That's what a male is. And if you fall outside of that definition, then you are either a female or you are intersex. And if you have a variation within that definition, then you are just a different variant of a male. It does not make you a different thing than a male. You are just a taller male, you're a shorter male, you're a darker male, a lighter male. You're a male with blue eyes.
Or a female
all
or an
variations that are
intersex
genetic.
person, a category which seems to include everybody who doesn't fit into your two-box system.
Yeah, I feel like
Which
again,
is
we're kind of slipping back and forth in between saying that we're describing reality and then saying that we must make reality to conform to our model of it. And those are, in
this is
fact,
biological
two very different things. We created the
And a
model
female and a
that's
female make a baby.
intended to describe reality, but if we discover that it doesn't, I think the thing that I would want to do first is examine, well, if my model doesn't match reality, maybe I need to adjust my model, not adjust reality. That's a little bit more difficult to do the second one. I'm going to actually recommend a book as well by a physical anthropologist. And what I love about physical anthropology is that it's one of those fields that kind of takes the social and the biological and kind of considers them together, which in my opinion is a very important thing to do, especially when we're talking about slippery concepts like sex and gender. And there's a book called Race, Monogamy, and Other Lies They Told You by Augustine Fuentes. And I know that sex and gender is not in the title of it, but it has a really good chapter on this that kind of goes into some of the details and some of the ways that what we might have learned in school about these sort of oversimplified models isn't actually a good representation of reality. So that might be another place to kind of look for some of the resources that we're talking about, see if that helps, or if maybe you don't agree with that or don't think that it comports with other studies that you've seen. But
Yeah.
that might be a good starting point.
All models are wrong. Some
just
models
trying
are
to-
useful. Grok, let me say this. We offered to give you 10 minutes. We're actually a little bit over time because we've been talking for 15 minutes now. I'm going to ask that you take a look at one of the episodes that I will make sure to include in the show notes of this episode, or if you prefer to maybe look at the book chapter that Kara is referring to. After you've taken a look at that, if you would like to tell us where we're wrong, tell us what we've misunderstood, send us an email. We will gladly read that on air. We will talk to you about it, and we'll do everything we can to help clear this up for you. We've spent a pretty good amount of time, I think, circling the same material here. So if we may, I think it's time for us to begin to wrap up the show for the night.
Certainly. I'm very appreciative of your time. Thank you.
All right.
Now,
Thanks for
please
calling.
take a look at those notes. They will be in the show notes for this episode. And Grok, you or anybody listening tonight who would like to disagree or maybe point out something that we've just like missed or misunderstood, please. It is not our goal here to push a narrative. It is our goal here to wait a second. Promote atheism, critical thinking, secular humanism, and the separation of religion and government.
Hey, how about that?
So
Well-
we're a little bit over time here, but Ricky, before we wrap up, before Kara takes us out for the night, I guess I just wanted to check and see if there were any particular resources that you might want to point people towards. We didn't talk much about the online doll community, but any links or just kind of further reading that you'd like to recommend people take a look at, I'd love to let people know on.
Cool. Well, first I'd like to start and say that one of the original places that a lot of people went to, but now it's pretty censored. Excuse me. You have to watch what you read when you go there because it's being actively censored by the people there. But a lot of people like going to Doll Forum. You just go to Google and you can Google Doll Forum, and you will be able to go to that website and see lots of different posts, lots of different topics and stuff. But, I also sent you all some links for people who want to check out our YouTube channel. And I'm proud to say that I've done more sex doll reviews than anyone in the world. And if you know someone who's done more, I'll have to say you're full of it. We've got a lot of great models, and not just to brag, but really to tell people, if you want to see what a doll looks like in video form, our channel is a great place to see that. And we do show different doll photo shoots that Scary Terry does on our Twitter. We have Pornhub, well, I guess I could say it, Pornhub channel. Now where Chibaro the clown goes at these dolls, and we kind of make these live action, show you what the doll looks like in action. And it's got some comedy to it too as well. And our Pornhub channel, to find that, you could just search for The Doll Channel, which is all caps, no spaces, and you could hopefully find that. And if you can't find that, then you can also email us at sales@thedollchannel.com, and we'll answer any inquiries. I also have a Discord. If you want, you could just email sales@thedollchannel.com, ask for our Discord. We could get you in there, and you could talk with lots of other people who have dolls, not just small dolls, but adult dolls as well. And, there's a lot of really accepting people in the doll community. And this hobby is very, very isolating for the reason that when you go out into the grocery store or whatever, you're not going to be able to talk to anybody about your hobby. It's going to be very taboo on your mind, and you're going to think, oh no, this person's going to think I'm weird. I'm not going to mention this. And luckily, a lot of people do come out and they have the courage to tell their brother or sister or mom or brother, whatever, just a friend, hey, I have a doll, and I'm a normal guy just like you. So don't judge me. And they'll often find that their neighbor or friend or brother says, you know what, you are a real normal person. And I accept that you have a doll, and I think it's even kind of cool. Can I see her? And then they end up buying a doll, so, or even had some people in our community who they got into this hobby because somebody gave them their previous doll. And some people are like, what, a used doll? Like, ew, who would take that? There's a lot of people who are like, what, if I clean this thing like 5 times with bleach, I bet you it's pretty clean. You know what I mean? And they're cool with that.
You are not a chewed up stick of gum, whether you're a person or a doll.
Whether you're a person or a doll.
Buy into that narrative.
Yes, and I tell people that, because a lot of people are like, what do you do with a doll once you're done with her? Like, she's lived her life. And you can, what a lot of people do, they go to a gas station dumpster and leave the doll there, or they go somewhere to a real dump.
That breaks
and
my heart a little bit.
I know it is
sad.
It is kind of sad, but you know what I have to tell you is that you may think that your doll has lived her whole life, and then you might sell her to somebody, and that guy is like, nope, I'm gonna fix her up and I'm gonna give her a new life. And I have this joke that I think there's a lot of people out there who you would think, oh no, this doll is done, nobody's gonna want this. There's always somebody who's gonna want your used doll. Trust me, we find them all the time.
Well, on that hopeful note, we will leave you. And for a new doll, get in touch with Ricky at thedollchannel.com. And also keep up with what's happening with the rest of the ACA on our website at atheist-community.org. Or you can also get in touch with us. Email this show at sex@atheist-community.org. I think some people say dash. Is that a dash or a hyphen?
Dash, hyphen, same difference. But I do hope that people will write in, especially about some of the touchy stuff that we've been talking about. If you felt anxious to call on this subject tonight, go ahead, write us anonymously. We can read it on air or not. We can include your name or not, and we'd love to hear from you.
Yes, yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. It is absolutely okay to write in if you don't want to call in. You can always do that. And you can also email the ACA in general at tv@atheist-or-community.org. And okay, we are back in the swing of things at the Free Thought Library at the end of every month. We are doing live shows again. So join us October 27th to 30th. We're going to have Christy and Chloe Manson at the Free Thought Library. We've got the schedule up here on the screen now. And Truth Wanted will do a Halloween special. Talk Heathen is going to have Johnny P. Angel and Cynthia McDonald. And the Atheist Experience is going to be on as well with Matt and Jimmy Snow. So if any or hopefully all of those sound exciting to you, come down and see us in Austin. Okay. And if you can't do that, or you don't want to, or you just want to go online, don't forget to check us out at tiny.cc/AEN podcasts for your one-stop shop to catch an audio version of the show. Or you can also find us online at the Facebook Secular Sexuality fan group. We're also on Discord, tiny.cc/ACD Discord. And finally, I promise I'm almost finished talking to you about things with web links in them. You can get some really cool merch at tiny.cc/merch ACA. We have all kinds of cool show themed items there. And we even have, seasonal pumpkin-y ones you can look at. So get your merch there. And finally, none of this would be possible without our super awesome and amazing crew who are here doing everything behind the scenes. So thank you to all of them. There they are saying hello. Y'all make it happen. Okay, I'm finished rattling off URLs, Christy.
Sure. Well, just before we leave, I mean, we talked about some very or sticky topics and some stuff that I absolutely appreciate can make people uncomfortable, but that we as a society should maybe be talking about, maybe feeling a little uncomfortable about, because these things really do matter. So with that in mind, Ricky, are there any kind of final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with tonight?
I just want to bring up the scamming thing. The scammers are like really, really out there. I mean, they are a high percentage of the sex doll vendors out there. And anybody in this community will tell you that. And I see that a lot. People are very scared, even to buy from me, who I've shown like, hundreds of videos. And you would think, well, I've showed my face. I've showed you that I know what I'm talking about. Like, but people still want some kind of proof that I'm not a scammer, that I'm real. And I think that just goes to show you that the scamming is so bad that they've read these stories to where they're super scared. So if you do buy a doll, again, check out my video, Silicone versus TPE dolls. Consider getting a less expensive TPE doll for your first doll. Get standing feet, because a lot of people get non-standing feet and try to stand the doll. It's not a good idea. And other than that, like, try not to get something too expensive. See if you like the hobby. If it works out for you, then graduate to a more expensive doll later on after you see if it's right for you, because it's not cool paying $5,000 for a doll and then finding out it's not what you thought it was going to be.
Fair to say. Kara, any final thoughts before I wrap us up for the night?
No, I'm just going to say nobody is garbage. You do not belong in a dumpster.
No matter what color your square is.
Exactly.
And I have to say thank you so much again for having me on the show. It was so much more fun than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be like a roast, but initially.
Hey, I'm just glad we're talking about it. But that's enough talking for now. Now, I guess, is the time for everybody to check whether they're using silicone or oil or water-based lubes. So check your lube, check your sources, grab your favorite toy, and give yourself a big ol' orgasm. Or, better yet, give somebody else one.
Watch Talk Heathen live Sundays at 1 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTH and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callth.